We're still on the identify risk step. What the purpose here is to recognise the threats and opportunities that may affect the project's objectives. And this is a very important slide. You see, because the word risk is in common language outside of projects, it tends to be used badly. But as a project manager, we need to better understand exactly what the nature of risks are. And I will introduce to you the term called risk event. This relates to an uncertain event or set of circumstances that would, if it occurred, have an effect on the achievement of one or more objectives. What do I mean by risk event rather than the risk itself? Well, I'll explain. You see, we know that in identifying the risks, what you're doing is capturing such identified threats and opportunities and adding them to the risk register. That's fine. You would also want to prepare early warning indicators for monitoring of critical aspects and potential risk sources. Yes, let's for example imagine a risk that the cost of importing certain products to be used in your system that your project is designing comes from a country in a different geographical area, and that exchange rates have been fluctuating recently. Because it's a major product, let's imagine, forming part of your solution, such fluctuations may cause the project to go outside of budget. So rather than wait until that happens and then panic, it would be a good idea to see if we could get someone to keep an eye on exchange rates, giving us advance warning if and when it looks like such exchange rates would impact our project. You need to obtain stakeholders' view of specific risks. And this is making the point that involving just those involved in creating the products would be very good for identifying technical risks, whereas the head of purchasing might identify risks that would have been missed had you not involved them. So here's the point I'm making. You see, for risk clarification, there are three elements: risk cause, risk event, and risk effect. The risk cause is the source of the risk. The risk event is where the uncertainty comes in, and the risk effect is the impact on the project. So the risk cause is the source, or the event or the situation, often known as the risk drivers. I'll give you a simple example in a minute, and this will become clearer. The risk event itself describes the threat or opportunity area of uncertainty, and the risk effect is in fact the impact on the project objectives. Suppose that the central site where your project is being managed uses employees from around a 20-mile radius, and it's that particular time of year where bad weather is to be expected. In particular, one risk which you've identified, the risk cause, is that there has been heavy storms and severe rain over the weekend, causing many local roads to be flooded. The risk event now goes on to describe the threat or opportunity area. So the description of this would be something like, as a result of the recent storms and heavy rain, many local roads are flooded, and this may cause difficulty being able to travel to the project site. That leaves us to the effect, which is the impact. As a result of this, the work effort needed to design the project's products may be delayed or extended, causing the end date of the project to slip. Now, can you see in this example, the risk cause was the heavy rain, the risk event was flooded roads, and the effect was that some staff would not be able to carry out their work on the project due to travel difficulties. The common error that I often see written down in project risk statements is that the statement merely describes the impact. Let me give you an example. There is a risk that we will exceed the project budget. Now, what can you say about that? The answer is nothing, because all you've got is the effect. You need the cause and the event for that to make any sense. For example, why do you think there's a risk we might blow the budget? And as a result of asking that question, you may find there's more than one cause and one event. So in actual fact, you've got several risks rather than one written badly and ambiguously. So we're going to cover in the coming slides various risk identification techniques. Yes, I'm still in the identify risk step here, and I'll be going through these over the coming slides. Reviewing similar projects, I've made a special point here, don't forget lessons learned. Whenever a project is finished, lessons learned should be stored in a central place, and there will almost certainly be lessons that could be learned from similar projects with regard to risks. You may have some in-house risk checklists, which would be specific to the type of products or the type of industry within which your projects sit. Risk prompt lists to help identify risks in the first place, and good old brainstorming, which is probably the most popular of all, getting all the right stakeholders in a room at one time and carrying out a brainstorming workshop. The use of risk breakdown structures that I showed you previously. By thinking through the various categories, you can help identify a category that you may not have thought of if you were just asked to come up with a list of risks. Risk checklists, very similar to risk prompt lists, and strengths, weaknesses and opportunity analysis. Carrying out risk workshops and interviews with particular stakeholders to help get their views and thoughts on what risks might be, or even on most appropriate action to take. Carrying out assumption analysis. Well, what's an assumption? It's a risk, isn't it? Because if you're assuming something, there's a risk it may not be what you assumed. So for every time you have an assumption, then you ought to think about what is the risk inherent within that assumption, and then go through the cause, event and effect thinking process. And constraints analysis. Aren't constraints also a risk? If you have a constraint that a certain product won't be available until a certain date and you need it by a certain date, there's a risk that it might slip. Or if you have a budgetary constraint, that would be an example of a risk. What would you do if such a budget was forecast to be exceeded?